I've camped in over 40 RV parks across the United States. From the humid swamps of Florida to the dry plateaus of Utah, I've slept beneath every kind of sky this country can throw at you. But Whispering Pines, that place isn't like anywhere else. It wasn't on any of the RV forums or travel maps I followed. I stumbled across it by accident, or maybe I should say, it stumbled across me. My name's Travis, 41 years old, born and raised in Southern Illinois. I started living out of my RV full-time 2 years ago, after my divorce finalized. It wasn't about freedom or rebellion or any of those cliche reasons you see in van life videos. I just couldn't stand being in that house anymore. Every room carried a memory I didn't want to face. The silence felt heavier there than anywhere I've been since. So I packed my things, sold off what I didn't need, and hit the road. For a while, it felt right. Moving from place to place, sleeping with the windows cracked open, the smell of pine and dirt drifting in. I'd wake up to the sound of woodpeckers or the soft patter of rain on the roof and think maybe this simple, lonely rhythm was what I needed to start over. But that all changed last November. I was heading north through Alabama, taking the back roads toward Tennessee. The nights were getting cold, and I was looking for a place to stay before a storm rolled in. My GPS had lost signal about an hour earlier, and I was running low on gas. That's when I saw the sign, barely visible in the fog. Hand-painted letters on weathered wood, Whispering Pines Campground, open all seasons. It wasn't listed on my maps. I almost passed it by. But the road ahead wound deeper into dark forest, and the last fuel station I'd seen was 50 miles back. The sign pointed toward a narrow dirt road between the trees. I slowed down, thought about turning around, but the wind picked up and rain began to spit against the windshield. I figured I'd just park there overnight, rest, and leave first thing in the morning. As soon as my tires left the pavement, I felt the difference. The road wasn't maintained. Deep ruts, wet soil, the kind of track that looks like it's been forgotten for decades. My headlights flicked over trees that leaned close together like eavesdroppers, and in between them, fog hung low, thick enough to blur the path ahead. After about 10 minutes, I started to see dim, orange glows through the trees. Lanterns, maybe? Or campfires? I followed them until the trees opened into a clearing. There it was. Whispering Pines. The campground was smaller than I expected, maybe a dozen lots total. The first thing that struck me was how still it was. No sound of laughter, no dogs barking, no engines humming, just wind slipping through the trees, making that eerie, whispering sound that gave the place its name. The pines here weren't like the others I'd seen across the South. They were tall, skeletal, their trunks stripped smooth like something had burned the bark away years ago. I pulled into an empty spot near a picnic table and killed the engine. Immediately, the silence pressed against me. My ears rang with it. I could hear the ticking of the cooling engine like a metronome. I got out to stretch my legs and nearly jumped when I saw a figure standing across the lot. An older man, maybe in his 60s, wearing a thick green jacket and a wide-brimmed hat. He was watching me from beside a small trailer. Not moving, not speaking. When I raised my hand to wave, he just nodded once and turned back toward his own camper. Something about him felt off, like he wasn't just curious about me, but wary, as if I'd just interrupted something. I told myself I was imagining it. The storm was closing in, and I was exhausted. I hooked up my generator, made a quick meal, and sat by the window listening to the wind hiss through the trees. Around 9 p.m., rain started tapping the roof, soft at first, then steady. That should have been comforting, but it wasn't. Because beneath the sound of rain, I kept hearing something else. At first, it was faint. A low hum, like someone speaking just outside the RV. Not words, just tones, shifting, rising and falling. I turned off the radio, thinking it was interference, but it didn't stop. I opened the blinds a crack and looked outside. The other trailers were dark. The lanterns I'd seen earlier were gone, swallowed by fog. For a moment, I thought I saw movement near the tree line, shadows slipping between trunks, but the rain blurred everything. By midnight, the hum had changed. It became a whispering sound, soft and rhythmic, weaving through the wind like it had intent, like it was calling. When I stepped outside, I could feel it more than hear it. The air felt charged, heavy. The pines creaked and swayed, though the wind wasn't strong. And then I realized something that made my stomach tighten. There were no crickets, no frogs, no forest sounds at all. Just that whispering. I walked toward the source, flashlight in hand. My boots sank in wet soil. The fog seemed thicker between the trees, almost alive, curling and recoiling from the beam. I didn't get far before I saw it. A circle of small stones arranged around the base of a tree, maybe 15 feet from my RV. The stones were smooth and white, wet from the rain, and in the middle of the circle lay a bundle of sticks tied together with what looked like red string. I crouched down. The sticks were shaped like a crude human figure. That's when I heard it again, closer this time. A whisper right behind me. I spun around, shining the light in every direction, but there was nothing. Just fog and trees and the endless sound of rain on needles. I backed away slowly, keeping the beam steady, my breath shaking. When I got back inside the RV, I locked the door and sat in silence for a long time. My heart wouldn't slow down. I kept thinking about the man I'd seen earlier, the one in the hat. Had he made that thing? Was it some kind of local ritual or prank? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was kids or an old forest tradition I didn't understand. But then around 2 a.m., I woke to a new sound, knocking, 3 sharp raps against the side of the RV. I froze, my mind raced. Maybe it was the old man checking on me, or maybe a branch had fallen. But then it came again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I got up, heart pounding, and looked through the window. Nothing. The rain had stopped. The fog had thickened so much I could barely see the picnic table a few feet away. Then something moved. Just a shadow at first, tall, thin, standing near the back of my RV. I blinked, leaned closer to the glass. When I looked again, it was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When dawn came, I stepped outside to check the ground. The fog was still there, but lighter. I expected to see footprints, but there were none. Just the same wet soil, the same circle of stones, except the stick figure was gone. And in its place, lying dead center, was a pine cone split open, and inside it, folded tight, was a piece of paper. It was soaked through, but I could still make out a few words written in black ink. Don't listen when they whisper back. That's when I decided I was leaving. I packed fast, unhooked the generator, and started the engine. But as soon as I tried to reverse out of the lot, the tires spun uselessly in the mud. I cursed under my breath, tried again. Nothing. The road that had led me in was now a swampy mess of runoff and fog. Every instinct told me I had to go, but every turn of the wheels only dragged me deeper in. And that's when I saw movement again. This time, not one shadow, but several. Shapes shifting between the trees, slow. Watching. I slammed the transmission into park and killed the engine. The fog outside had thickened into a pale wall, swallowing everything past a few yards. My hands were trembling as I pulled my jacket on and grabbed the flashlight again. The rain had stopped completely now, but the air felt colder, wet and heavy like it carried breath in it. I told myself I just needed traction. I'd throw some boards under the tires, maybe use the leveling blocks, anything to get unstuck. But the moment I stepped out, that silence hit again. It wasn't just quiet, it was hollow, like the world had stopped moving. And then I heard it. That same whispering sound. Not distant this time, close, all around. It came from the pines, threading through them like wind that carried voices. Low, rhythmic, almost patterned like language just out of reach. I swung my flashlight toward the nearest tree line. The beam caught movement. Not figures exactly, but shapes. Thin, human-sized silhouettes sliding between the trunks. My stomach clenched. I shouted out, voice cracking, "Hey, who's out there?" The whispering stopped, just for a second. Then it came again, louder this time, as if my voice had drawn it closer. I forced myself toward the back of the RV where the tire tracks sank into the muck. My boots squelched with every step. I crouched, wedged the leveling block behind the tire, and started the engine again. The sound of it felt too loud, like I'd broken some unspoken rule. I threw it in reverse, pressing the gas hard. The RV rocked, spat mud, and finally lurched backward a few feet. That's when I saw something in the backup camera feed. A figure standing in the fog behind me. Pale, unmoving, just a silhouette. I froze. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror. Nothing there. I glanced back to the camera screen again. Still there, same spot. And then the figure tilted its head, slowly, like it had noticed I was watching. I slammed it into drive and floored the gas. The RV roared forward, mud spraying up along the sides, bouncing off ruts. I didn't care about damaging the suspension, I just needed to get out of that clearing. I followed what I thought was the road, but the fog was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Branches scraped against the windows. The GPS was dead. My heart pounded against my ribs, each breath short and shallow. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the fog parted for a moment, and there it was, the same wooden sign I'd seen last night. Whispering Pines Campground, open all seasons. I had driven in a full circle. I slammed the brakes. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. The road had looped me right back to the entrance. But the strangest part, the letters on the sign weren't just painted now. They were carved deep, the grooves fresh and raw like they'd been cut overnight. And someone or something had added words beneath, "Stay quiet." I didn't think, I just drove. I followed that same dirt road again, faster this time, the RV bucking over the ruts. I needed pavement, a sign, anything that told me I was heading back toward civilization. But every few minutes the fog would close in again, and I'd see those same pines, that same clearing, like the forest was rearranging itself around me. By noon, my gas gauge was almost empty. I parked on a small rise and killed the engine to save what little fuel I had left. When I stepped outside, the fog was thinner, but the air felt wrong. It had this metallic tang, like rust or blood. I sat on the step of the RV, head in my hands, trying to think. I'd been driving in circles for hours. The compass app on my phone spun uselessly, like it didn't know which way north was. And every time I thought I heard something in the trees, a footstep, a breath, the faint crunch of needles, I told myself it was just paranoia. Until I saw the old man again. He was standing at the far edge of the clearing, motionless, that same green jacket and hat. He looked even older now, shoulders hunched, his face hidden in shadow. "Hey," I called out. My voice echoed weakly. "You know the way out of here?" He didn't answer. He just raised one arm and pointed to the forest, to the same direction I'd come from. I shook my head. "No, I tried that way already. It loops back." Still, no movement, just that slow, steady pointing gesture. Something inside me broke a little then, the exhaustion, the fear, the endless gray swallowing the world. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward him, calling out again. But as I got closer, I realized he wasn't pointing anymore. His arm was stiff, unmoving, like he couldn't lower it. When I reached him, I understood why. It wasn't an arm. Not anymore. His entire hand, forearm, and shoulder were wrapped tight in what looked like bark, dark, dry, cracked like an old tree trunk. His skin was fused to it, the wood growing from his body. His mouth hung open slightly, eyes glazed white. He wasn't alive. He was part of the forest. My chest tightened so hard I couldn't breathe. I stumbled back, tripped over a root, scrambled to my feet. I didn't even look where I was running. I just moved, crashing through brush until I saw the RV again. When I got back inside, I locked every door, shut every blind, and sat there shaking. My brain couldn't make sense of it. What the hell had I just seen? Some kind of art? Disease? A hallucination? But then the whispering started again. This time it wasn't outside. It was coming from within the RV, from the vents, the cabinets, the thin walls themselves. Leave, leave, leave. I could hear it in the air system, threading through the static hiss. The voice was soft but layered, like several people whispering the same word at once. I covered my ears, shouted, but it only got louder. I turned off the battery power, killed the inverter, everything went dark. Still, the whispers kept going, faint but relentless. I don't remember when I fell asleep. It must have been from exhaustion. When I woke again, night had fallen. The RV was freezing cold. The windows were fogged from the inside, streaked with condensation. And written on the glass in long trails of moisture were words drawn by a fingertip. Don't run. Listen. My heart slammed so hard it hurt. I backed away, tripping over my bag, knocking over a thermos. The writing was fresh. It hadn't been there before I fell asleep. And then, faintly, from somewhere outside, I heard something new. Not whispers. Singing. A low, soft voice humming through the trees like a woman's lullaby carried on the wind. It drifted closer, then faded, then returned again, looping like a melody that didn't belong to this world. Against every instinct I had, I moved toward the window and pulled the blind just an inch. Through the fog, at the edge of my headlights, I saw her. A woman standing among the pines, barefoot, wearing what looked like a torn white nightgown. Her hair hung long and wet, plastered against her back. She swayed as she sang, her face turned away from me. I don't know why, but something in that song made my skin crawl. It wasn't the sound itself. It was what I felt behind it. The words weren't human. And even though her face was hidden, I knew she was smiling. I pressed my back against the door, heart hammering, breath fogging the air. I didn't dare move. The woman kept singing out there, that slow, broken melody threading through the fog like it was winding around my mind. There were no words, just this haunting tune that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the trees swaying. I tried to tell myself it was just some lost camper, maybe drunk or disoriented. But she wasn't moving like someone lost. She was gliding. Her body swayed in a way that didn't match her steps. Her feet barely broke the surface of the ground. Then she stopped singing. The silence that followed was unbearable. I waited, muscles locked, staring at the frosted glass of the window. A few seconds later, there came a soft tap, tap, tap on the door, 3 times. Gentle, deliberate, my stomach turned over. She knew I was in here. Every instinct screamed at me not to answer, not to make a sound. I clamped my hands over my mouth and just listened. Another set of taps, this time against the window. Closer. I could see her shadow move just outside, long fingers brushing against the glass. Go away, I whispered, barely audible even to myself. The shadow froze. And then she spoke. Her voice was low, like it came through water. Travis. I felt my entire body go cold. She said my name. No one at this campground should have known it. I hadn't told a soul. I stumbled backward, knocking into the small kitchen counter, eyes wide. Who are you? I shouted, voice cracking. No response. Just the faint sound of her breath against the window, fogging the glass in slow, steady bursts. Then, slowly, the humming began again. This time softer, right at the edge of hearing. It sounded like it was coming from inside the RV now, not outside. I spun around, searching every corner. The air felt thick and warm, like someone else was breathing in there with me. I opened every cabinet, checked under the bed, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. Then the humming stopped, and I heard another sound, faint scratching from inside the wall. It came in short, quick bursts. Then, slowly, I saw something move beneath the wallpaper, a thin, dark line snaking downward like a vein forming under skin. I stared, frozen as it spread, branching out in jagged patterns until it formed a shape. Letters. Listen. The word was carved into the wall from the inside. That broke me. I grabbed my keys, yanked the door open, and ran into the night. The fog swallowed me whole. The air outside was bitter cold, and my flashlight beam seemed to bend and die a few feet ahead. I ran past the picnic table, past the circle of stones, except it wasn't just one circle anymore. There were dozens, each one with something different at the center. Bundles of sticks, bones, blackened feathers, pieces of cloth. Every instinct told me to stop looking. But I couldn't. I saw shapes hanging from the trees, small wooden figures tied up by their necks, spinning slowly in the damp breeze. Some of them looked new, too new. I started to turn back toward the RV when I saw something glowing between the trees. A dim orange light, flickering like fire. I moved toward it, my body trembling, drawn by something I couldn't explain. There, in a clearing deeper in the forest, a campfire burned. Around it, 5 figures stood in complete stillness, their faces hidden by hoods made of pine bark and moss. They weren't moving, weren't speaking, just standing, their heads tilted slightly toward the fire as if listening. I stepped closer, trying to stay quiet, but my boot cracked a branch. Every head turned in unison. That sound, the sharp snap of motion, was too synchronized to be human. My breath hitched. The nearest figure lifted its hand and pointed directly at me. I bolted. Branches whipped at my arms and face. I didn't care. I just ran, crashing through the fog, losing direction completely. The forest seemed to shift around me. The trees pressed closer, their trunks pale and slick, their bark stripped like bone. I could still hear them behind me, the slow crunch of feet, unhurried, confident. When I finally broke through the tree line, I stumbled into another clearing. For a moment, I thought I'd made it back to the road, but no. My headlights were still there, cutting through the fog. I'd come full circle again. The RV sat exactly where I'd left it, lights off, door slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. I knew I'd shut that door when I ran out. I approached slowly, gripping the flashlight so tight my hand hurt. I reached for the handle, hesitated, then pulled it open. The smell hit me first. Damp earth, pine sap, and something else underneath. Sweet. Rotting. The inside of the RV looked the same, except for one thing. On the table, in the middle of the little kitchen, was a single pine cone, split open. Inside it, another piece of paper. This one was dry, clean, like it had been placed there seconds ago. I unfolded it. She was here before you. She'll be here after. Listen. My hand shook as I dropped the note. I turned toward the window, toward the reflection of myself in the glass, and froze. Because there was someone standing behind me. A woman's silhouette, faint and pale in the reflection. Her face was inches from mine, though when I spun around, the space was empty. The air still rippled with warmth like she'd just breathed there. I grabbed my keys again, started the engine, and didn't stop this time. I drove straight ahead, not caring if I hit trees or rocks. The headlights cut through the fog, and suddenly, just as abruptly as it had appeared, the forest broke open. Pavement. Real road. I didn't even think. I just kept driving until the fog disappeared behind me, the pines thinning out into open highway. I drove for miles, maybe hours, before I finally pulled over at a gas station outside Montgomery. When I stepped out, dawn was breaking. The air smelled like diesel and wet asphalt, normal, blessedly normal. I filled up the tank with shaking hands, trying to convince myself I'd just hallucinated everything. But then I noticed something. Mud smeared across the RV's side window. Handprints. Small, slender, and too high up for anyone to have reached without standing on the hood. And inside the glass, pressed from the inside out, there were faint streaks, like someone's fingertips had trailed downward while watching me drive. That night, I checked the inside again, every inch. Nothing. But when I lay down to sleep, I could still hear her voice, faint, far away, buried under the hum of the engine. A lullaby. Soft. Patient. Waiting. I haven't gone back to Whispering Pines since. I've driven 1,000 miles in every direction trying to outrun that sound. But sometimes, when I park at night and the forest starts whispering outside the RV, I swear I can still hear her singing. And when I listen too long, when I forget to drown it out with music or prayer, I can almost hear what she's saying now. Not leave. Not listen. Just one word, repeated over and over, with that slow, knowing smile behind it. Stay. By the time I made it to Kentucky, I'd convinced myself I was done talking about Whispering Pines. I told myself it was exhaustion, isolation, stress, anything but what it really felt like. I started staying in crowded campgrounds, the kind where kids ride bikes between the lots and people leave their awnings strung with Christmas lights. The noise, the laughter, even the faint music at night, it all helped drown out that memory. For a while. But memories like that don't just stay buried. They wait. I was parked outside Mammoth Cave in early November, almost a year to the day since Whispering Pines. The nights were colder this time, the kind that sink into your bones. I had the heater running and a movie playing low on the TV. I was doing fine, really fine, until I heard the wind. It wasn't unusual to hear wind moving through the forest, but this one sounded wrong. It wasn't just passing through. It circled the RV, wrapping around it, pressing against the thin metal like it was trying to find a way in. The hairs on my arms lifted, and then I smelled it. Pine sap. Faint, but sharp. Just like that night. I froze, eyes fixed on the door. For a moment, everything in me wanted to pretend it was nothing. But deep down, I already knew whatever I'd left behind hadn't stayed behind. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I started to drift, I'd hear something, a creak, a soft tap against the window, or that faint hum buried under the wind. By dawn, I decided I was done running from it. I needed to know what Whispering Pines really was. So I started researching. It took weeks. That campground wasn't listed anywhere. No website, no reviews, no coordinates. I scrolled through old satellite images, through obscure forums about ghost towns and abandoned parks. Eventually, I found a thread buried in an old RV discussion board, posted in 2013, long dead except for one reply. Someone had written, "Does anyone remember a place called Whispering Pines in northern Alabama? Stayed there back in the 80s. Creepiest night of my life. We left before sunrise." One reply 3 years later, "You saw her too." That was it. No coordinates, no explanation, but that was all I needed. I started tracing old land records, campground permits, anything with that name. Finally, I found something, a property record from 1979, registered to a man named Elias Crane. It listed the land as private campground, 14 lots, closed in 1991 after a wildfire, except I'd seen those pines. They weren't burned, they were stripped. I started making calls. County offices, state parks, forestry departments, most had never heard of it. But one clerk, an older woman in Jackson County, hesitated when I asked. Her voice dropped low. "You don't want to go near that property, son. That's Crane's Woods, scrub. Nobody's camped there in 30 years. "Why?" I asked, because the fire never happened. She hung up. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I pulled out my maps again, tracing every possible route I'd taken that night, every back road, every turn. And then I saw it, a faint dirt spur off County Road 19. It wasn't labeled, but if I followed my route north, it lined up almost perfectly. Against all reason, I decided to go back. I told myself it was closure, that I needed to face it, to prove it was real. But if I'm honest, I think part of me knew I'd never really left that place. When I crossed into Alabama again, I felt it before I even saw the sign. The air grew still, the same thick quiet that made you hear your own blood in your ears. The forest pressed closer to the road, light filtering through the branches in long, thin beams. And then there it was, the same wooden sign, weathered, half buried in weeds. Whispering Pines Campground. The words "Stay quiet" were still carved beneath, the grooves darker now, almost black. My hands were slick with sweat as I turned onto the dirt road. The RV rattled over the ruts. The forest looked exactly the same skeletal pines, the same fog drifting low over the ground. When I reached the clearing, my breath caught. The campground was gone. No picnic tables, no fire rings, no trailers, just a barren field of dirt and pine needles, as if no one had ever been there at all. For a moment, I almost laughed. Maybe I'd lost it after all. Maybe this was just some cruel trick of memory. But then I noticed something. There were depressions in the ground, dozens of them, each the size of a small lot. Perfect rectangles, sunken a few inches deep, like graves. I walked between them slowly, the wind whispering overhead. The air was thick with that same scent, pine sap and damp soil. My boots crunched over something brittle. I looked down, a small, carved stick figure, old, weathered, tied with red string. I crouched to pick it up. The second my fingers brushed it, the air shifted. The wind stopped. The forest went dead silent. And then I heard it again, that humming, faint, distant, threading through the trees. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the fog, but I already knew where it came from. Behind me, deep between the pines, a light flickered. Dim, orange, firelight. My chest tightened, every instinct screaming to run. But my legs moved on their own. As I walked closer, the air grew warmer. The whispering returned, layered, overlapping, words I couldn't quite make out. Then the trees opened and I saw them. The same 5 figures from before. Still hooded, still silent, standing around the fire. But this time, one of them turned as I approached. And beneath the hood, I didn't see a face. I saw bark. Pale, stretched, cracked bark with eyes buried underneath. Eyes that looked wet and human. I stumbled back, choking on my breath. "What are you?" I gasped. The figure tilted its head, its mouth opened, dry wood creaking, and from inside I heard her voice. That same woman. Soft, melodic, whispering through the hollow of the trunk. "You came back, Travis." My knees went weak. "You're not real," I said. "You're real?" She interrupted, the voice smiling through the word. "You made me real. You heard us. You listened." The figures began to move then, slowly, circling the fire. The flames didn't cast shadows on them. Instead, the light bent around their shapes like the air itself refused to touch them. "You left the door open," she said. "When you ran, you brought us with you." My throat tightened. "What do you want?" "Not want," she said. "Remember." She stepped closer, and for the first time I saw her face through the flickering light. It wasn't a face at all, just a hollowed-out mask of wood and skin, with eyes that were mine. "You listened," she whispered again. "Now you stay." The ground trembled beneath me. The pines creaked, bending inward. The fire flared, and the figures began to hum, the same low rhythm I'd heard that first night. My vision blurred. The world tilted sideways. When I came to, it was daylight. The clearing was empty, the fire gone, no sign of anyone. I stumbled back toward where I thought the RV was, but there was nothing. No tracks, no ruts, no road, just endless pines. I walked for hours, maybe days, I don't know. Eventually, I found another road, a different one. It led to a gas station off Highway 71. The clerk said I'd come from the east, but when I looked at the map, there was no road that way. Nothing but forest. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, strange things keep happening. My phone plays static at night. The walls of the RV like something's shifting inside them. And when I try to sleep, I hear the whispering again, just faint enough that I can't tell if it's outside or in my head. But the worst part is the smell. It follows me now. That same sharp pine sap, sweet and earthy, clinging to everything. I've scrubbed the walls, the floors, every inch of the RV. Nothing works. It's like it's soaked into the metal. Sometimes when I catch my reflection in the mirror, I swear I see something under my skin, tiny cracks, faint and dark like veins made of wood. I try to tell myself it's just exhaustion, stress, but deep down I know what's happening. Whispering Pines isn't a place you find. It's a place that finds you. And when it does, when you hear it calling, you never really leave. You just drive, listening to the hum in the engine, to the wind against the windows, until you realize it's not wind at all. It's them, whispering, waiting. And one day soon, they'll ask me again to stop running, to listen, and to finally stay. It's strange how easy it is to pretend everything's normal, even when you know it's not. You can go through the motions, eat, drive, talk to people at gas stations, and on the surface, you look fine. But underneath, something's unraveling. That's what it's been like since I left Whispering Pines behind again. Or at least since I thought I did. At first, it was small things. A faint humming at night, a soft creak that seemed to move from one corner of the RV to another. I told myself it was the wind or the pipes expanding. But then I started noticing the pine needles. They were everywhere. I'd sweep them out in the morning, and by nightfall, they'd be back. Not from outside, they were inside. In the sink, in my shoes, even in the shower drain. Perfect, dry pine needles. One night I woke to a faint scratching sound near the refrigerator. When I opened it, every shelf was lined with needles, arranged in neat parallel rows. That's when I stopped trying to explain it. A week later, I parked at a rest stop just past the Tennessee border. The air smelled like rain, and I remember thinking maybe a good storm would clear my head. I shut off the engine, closed the blinds, and tried to sleep. But around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps on the gravel outside. Slow, deliberate, moving from the back of the RV to the front. I sat up, holding my breath. The steps stopped right beside the door. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps. I didn't move. After a long silence, I heard it, whispering, Not outside this time, inside, somewhere near the bathroom. It was faint, just a single voice, a woman's voice. Travis? It wasn't threatening. It wasn't angry. It sounded almost tired, like someone who'd been waiting too long. When I finally gathered the courage to look, there was nothing there. But on the mirror, written in the fog, were 3 words, "You still here?" After that night, I couldn't stay still anymore. I kept driving, north, west, anywhere with open sky and distance. But it didn't matter. No matter how far I went, the scent followed. Everywhere I stopped, people noticed. Cashiers, park rangers, other campers. They'd wrinkle their noses and say, "You been cutting pine?" Sometimes I'd hear them whisper to each other after I walked away. Then something strange started happening with the radio. It didn't matter what station I tuned to. Every now and then, a soft hum would cut through the static. Always the same pitch, the same low rhythm I'd heard that first night. I started recording it. When I played it back, I realized it wasn't just sound, it was words, layered and stretched, but there. Remember, listen, stay. I told myself I'd had enough, that I'd drive the RV into the nearest junkyard, walk away, start fresh. But when I tried, the engine wouldn't start. It wasn't dead, it just refused. Every system worked, every light flickered, but when I turned the key, it hummed, the same pitch. That's when I realized the sound wasn't in the engine, it was in me. That hum lived somewhere deep in my chest now, like a second heartbeat. I can feel it when I breathe. I can feel it when I sleep. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see her again, standing in the trees, hands clasped, head tilted, watching me with those hollow wooden eyes. She doesn't speak anymore. She just listens. I think that's what she wanted all along, to be heard, to be remembered. And maybe that's what Whispering Pines really is. Not a place you visit, but a voice that never dies, a memory that feeds on those who carry it. Some nights when I park near an empty lot or a forgotten trailhead, I swear I can see the glow of that old campfire in the distance, faint and flickering, like it's waiting for me to come back. Maybe I already have, because lately when I walk outside in the dark, I hear more than the wind. I hear others, soft voices, scattered through the trees, whispering the same rhythm, the same tone. Sometimes they whisper my name, sometimes they whisper yours. And if you ever find yourself driving through northern Alabama, if the road turns quiet and the air smells like pine sap, don't stop. Don't listen. Because once you do, they'll know you heard. And once they know that, you'll never drive alone again. They say Glacier Bay is beautiful in a way that feels ancient, the kind of beauty that reminds you how small and temporary you are. But beauty can be misleading. I learned that the hard way. My name's Wyatt, 43 years old, part-time photographer, full-time wanderer. I've been living out of my Volkswagen Westfalia for 3 years now. I've seen a lot of wild country, from the red rocks of Utah to the mist-soaked forests of Oregon. But nothing ever got under my skin like Alaska did, and specifically Glacier Bay National Park. It started as a trip I told myself I deserved, a final stretch north before winter closed the roads. I'd been chasing solitude. I wanted to camp near the bay's edge, watch the glaciers calve into the sea, capture that sound, the deep thunder that only ice can make when it breaks. But the locals in Gustavus warned me that camping too far off the main trail wasn't smart this late in the season. The fog, they said, comes alive out here, and once it sets in, sound carries wrong. I should have listened. The drive-in was quiet, too quiet. Even the birds seemed to keep their distance from the shoreline. I parked my van just past the tree line, close enough to the water that I could hear the tide crackle against the ice. The air smelled like metal and moss, sharp, wet, heavy with age. I set up camp, opened the rear hatch of my Volkswagen, and leaned back, watching the pale light fade over the bay. The first night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing something moving outside. Not close, but rhythmic, a soft dragging sound through gravel like someone walking barefoot along the shore. When I finally forced myself to look, flashlight trembling in my hand, there was nothing, only mist. My beam caught on a thin veil of ice crystals swirling in the air. But that dragging sound, It stopped the second I stepped outside. The next morning, I found footprints. Human-shaped but wrong. The spacing was uneven, like whoever made them was limping or dragging one leg. They started from the water's edge and disappeared near my van's back tire. I took a photo because that's what I do when I don't understand something. I document it. But the picture came out warped, the focus smeared as if the lens had been fogged from inside. That's when the unease began, quiet, subtle, like the air itself was paying attention to me. That night, I built a small fire near the van. The wood smoked more than it burned. It had a sour, chemical smell that made my eyes sting. Every sound seemed magnified, the hiss of the fire, the groan of the tide, the occasional pop of ice collapsing in the distance. Around midnight, I heard it again, that dragging rhythm, this time closer. I killed my lantern and sat still, heart hammering in my chest. Then I saw it. A figure maybe 20 yards away, standing just beyond the firelight. Tall, too tall. Its outline shimmered slightly, like heat rising from a road, but the air was freezing. I couldn't make out a face, only the movement, a slow tilt of the head, a faint lift of one arm. I thought it might be another camper, lost or disoriented. So I called out, no answer. I stood, took a step forward, and the figure retreated, but not backward. It seemed to slide sideways into the fog. The mist closed behind it like a curtain, and the sound of the dragging faded into the night. When dawn came, my fire pit was filled with ice. Not frost, actual shards of ice, packed tight like something had deliberately quenched the flames. My sleeping bag was damp, though I hadn't left it open. My Volkswagen smelled like seawater and rust. I thought about leaving right then, but something in me, pride maybe, wouldn't let me. I told myself it was isolation messing with my senses. I'd been camping alone too long. So I drove deeper into the park, down a narrow, rutted track barely wide enough for my van. The fog thickened, curling between the trees like smoke. I had to drive with my window cracked just to hear the world outside. At some point, the road ended at a small clearing with an old ranger cabin. The structure looked abandoned, door ajar, moss climbing up its sides, a tin roof sagging under the weight of years. I parked nearby and went to knock, just in case someone was still maintaining it. My knuckles hit soft wood, rotted, spongy. The door swung open on its own. Inside, everything was still. Dust motes floated in the cold air. A cot lay overturned, a kettle rusted through. But what caught my eye was the wall. It was covered in carvings. Dozens of names scratched deep into the wood. Some looked recent, others so old they'd faded into the grain. Beneath each name a date, and next to a few of them a single word, returned. I don't know how long I stood there staring. My stomach turned. The air in that cabin felt thick, like breathing underwater. I backed out slowly, eyes darting toward the tree line. That's when I heard it again, the dragging sound. This time it came from behind the cabin. Slow, deliberate, accompanied by a faint wheezing breath. I ran back to my van, slammed the door, locked it twice. The fog pressed against the windows like living skin. For a few minutes, all I could hear was the engine idling and my own pulse in my ears. Then something brushed against the side of the van, a soft, deliberate stroke like fingertips over metal. I froze. The sound traced from the driver's door to the rear panel, then stopped. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just sat there, waiting. And then from outside, a voice, soft, hoarse, almost a whisper. Wyatt. I swear to you, I hadn't told anyone my name. The voice came again, closer to the glass. Return. The word echoed inside me like a memory I didn't remember making. I turned the ignition fully, floored the gas, and tore out of that clearing. The road twisted through the mist, every turn the same. For a moment, I thought I was driving in circles. When I finally broke through the fog into open air, the sun had already started to set. I didn't stop until I reached the ferry dock. Engine smoking, heart still pounding. But even now, months later, when I close my eyes, I can still hear it. That dragging, that breath, that whisper calling my name through the cold. And sometimes, when I wake in my van and see condensation frozen along the window, I can almost make out a handprint. I used to think Glacier Bay was dangerous because of the weather, the ice, the isolation, the wild. Now I know it's dangerous because it remembers. It doesn't let go of the people who try to leave it behind. I didn't tell anyone what happened that night. You can't just walk into a ranger station and say a glacier whispered your name. People already think living out of a van makes you unstable. I told myself I was just tired. I'd been on the road too long, too alone. But denial only works when you stay still, when you don't notice the little things piling up behind you. The first sign that something had followed me came 2 days later, in Juneau. I'd parked at a small campground off the main road near the water. It was supposed to feel safe, people around, families, laughter, the kind of noise that normally makes the dark feel smaller. I opened my van door that evening and the smell hit me before anything else. Salt, decay, and something metallic underneath, like blood and ice. I thought maybe a fish carcass had washed up nearby. But it wasn't outside. It was coming from inside my van. My bedding was damp again, the air thick with that same heavy cold. I checked every inch of the floor, the storage bins, the vents. Nothing. Then I noticed the condensation on the rear window, 4 long streaks drawn downward like fingers dragging through frost. I wiped them off and stood there for a long time, feeling my pulse in my neck. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the fire ring, listening to the tide and the wind chimes from the RVs down the row. For a while, it was peaceful. Then, a woman walked past my sight. She looked like a local. Parka, gloves, quiet gait. She stopped by the edge of the firelight and nodded. "You came from Glacier Bay," she said, like it wasn't a question. I stared at her, thrown off. "Yeah, how'd you know?" She didn't answer. She looked over my shoulder at the van instead, eyes narrowing like she was trying to see something behind me. Then, softly, "You should clean your mirrors before sunrise." I turned to ask what she meant, but she was already walking away, her boots silent on the gravel. By morning, she was gone. Nobody in the campground had seen her. When I went to check the van's mirrors, my stomach turned. Each side mirror had a thin crust of frost, but the rest of the van was dry. And there, clear as day, was a handprint on the driver's side mirror. Small, human. But where the fingers should have been, there were long, thin streaks that ended in scratches through the ice. I packed up in a hurry and left. On the road south, the fog caught up with me again. Not the normal kind. This stuff rolled low, hugging the asphalt like it was alive. I slowed down, the Volkswagen engine rumbling steady beneath me. A sound I used to find comforting. But every few minutes, I'd hear something else underneath it, a faint tapping, like someone drumming a single finger against metal from inside the van's frame. I pulled over at a scenic overlook, heart pounding. When I stepped out, the air was still. No wind, no birds, no waves. Just that low, endless quiet. The fog pulsed faintly like it was breathing. I walked around the van, inspecting every inch. Nothing. But when I got to the back, I froze. The license plate was gone. In its place, someone had pressed a flat piece of glacier ice into the metal, wedged perfectly into the slot. And carved into that ice, in letters jagged and wet, was my name. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. I got back in the van, turned the key, and drove until I hit the next town. I stopped at a diner on the edge of the dock. The waitress was older, weathered by sea air and winters. She poured me coffee, glanced out the window, and said, "You're shaking. Rough drive?" I nodded. "Came down from Glacier Bay." Her hand paused mid-pour. The cup overflowed slightly, but she didn't move. "You shouldn't camp there this late in the year." "I know that now," I said, forcing a laugh. "Locals told me it's dangerous, but I didn't think they meant." She cut me off. "The bay doesn't like to be left behind." Her eyes shifted toward the fog outside, voice lowering. "My brother was a ranger there. He disappeared in '93. The only thing they found was his van. Ice all over the inside, like it snowed in there." She walked away before I could ask more. That night, I decided to sleep in the parking lot instead of the campground. I left the engine running for warmth. The fog thickened around the van again, dense, silent, suffocating. I tried to play music to drown it out, but the speakers just hissed like static caught between radio stations. And underneath that static, faint but distinct, A voice whispered through the frequency. Return. I slammed the knob off. My breath hung in the air like smoke. Something brushed against the back of the van again, light, testing. Then came the dragging sound. I looked through the rearview mirror, and for a split second I saw a movement in the fog. A tall, dark silhouette leaning close to the glass, breath fogging the inside. Its mouth was open wider than it should have been, but the eyes looked tired. I threw the van into gear and drove, not caring about direction, only distance. The fog chased me for miles, glowing white in my headlights, curling in my mirrors. When it finally broke, I pulled into a rest stop and killed the engine. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I sat there, eyes closed, and for the first time in years, I prayed. Not for forgiveness, not for courage, but just to forget. But the ice doesn't let you forget. When I woke, dawn was spilling over the horizon. The fog had lifted. For a moment, everything felt normal. The sound of a crow, the chill air, the way sunlight glinted off the metal of my van. Then I looked at my windshield. Frozen across the glass in delicate lines of ice was a map. It showed the bay, the trails, the same ranger cabin, and at the center, marked by a small X, was something new, something labeled Wyatt, returned. I scraped at the ice until my fingers burned, but the mark stayed. You can't reason with a place like Glacier Bay. You can only survive it long enough to realize it doesn't care whether you believe in it or not. It just wants to be remembered. By the time I reached the outskirts of Haines, I hadn't slept in 2 days. My hands were raw from gripping the steering wheel, and my eyes burned from watching the mirrors. Every time the fog rolled over the road, I half expected to see that figure standing there again, motionless, waiting. I kept telling myself I'd stop at the next populated town, get a motel, warm up, and rest. But the truth was, I didn't trust being indoors anymore. Something about enclosed spaces made me feel like the walls could breathe. I found a spot just off the highway near a cliff overlooking Lynn Canal. The view was breathtaking. Distant mountains reflected in still water, sunlight glinting on ice fields in the distance. You could almost forget that death lived quietly beneath the beauty of this state. I parked, brewed instant coffee, and leaned against the van, trying to anchor myself to something real. That's when I saw the boat, a small aluminum skiff drifting slow across the canal. No engine, no oars, no one visible on board, just rocking gently on the swell. It moved as if pulled by the tide, except the tide was going the other way. The boat was moving against the current, heading inland. I squinted through the binoculars I kept in my glove box. Inside the boat was something I recognized instantly, an old park ranger jacket. The same kind I'd seen hanging in that abandoned cabin in Glacier Bay. It was propped against the seat, stiff as if frozen, and there was a shape beneath it, a human shape. I lowered the binoculars, pulse pounding. When I looked again, the boat was gone. I told myself I was hallucinating, exhaustion, fear, all catching up to me. But that night, I found something even harder to explain. When I climbed into the van to sleep, my seat was damp. I touched the fabric, wet, cold, and smelling faintly of seawater. I reached under the seat cushion, and my fingers brushed something smooth. I pulled it out. It was a piece of driftwood, polished by the sea, but carved into it crudely and deep were the words, "You came back." I threw it out the window, started the engine, and drove again, headlights slicing through darkness that never seemed to end. The radio crackled with static, faint voices buried underneath, whispering in tones I couldn't quite separate from my own thoughts. Around midnight, I came to a small roadside pull-off, just a wooden sign marking the turnoff for an unmarked trail. Something about it drew me in, though I didn't know why. Maybe I wanted proof that this wasn't all in my head. Maybe I was just too tired to care anymore. I parked and stepped out. The air was so still that my footsteps sounded louder than they should have. I followed the trail a short distance, flashlight beam trembling in my hand. Then, up ahead, I saw a faint blue glow, like moonlight reflecting on ice. It was a small pond, perfectly circular, rimmed with frost. Steam curled from its surface, though the night was freezing. I stepped closer, breath fogging the air. The glow came from beneath the surface, soft and pulsating, almost like a heartbeat. I crouched down and brushed snow from the edge. My reflection shimmered in the water, but there was something else beside it. Another face. It was mine, but older, gaunt, eyes sunken and lifeless. The mouth moved, lips shaping words I couldn't hear. I stumbled backward, tripped over a root, hit the ground hard. When I looked again, the pond was still, dark and ordinary. No glow, no face, just my own panicked reflection staring back. I ran. Back in the van, I locked the doors and sat shaking. My mind felt split open, like it couldn't hold everything that was happening. Every sound outside, the creak of the trees, the settling of the van, made me flinch. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps circling the vehicle, slow, dragging, the same rhythm as before. I killed the lights, my breath shallow, every nerve in me wired tight. The steps stopped by the driver's door. Then came that same hoarse whisper through the crack of the window, "Return." My hands shook as I reached for the ignition, but then the voice changed. It wasn't hoarse anymore. It was mine. "Wyatt," it said, "you never left." I froze, because it wasn't echoing from outside anymore. It was behind me. I turned slowly, and for a split second I saw movement in the reflection of the rearview mirror. Someone sitting in the back seat, pale skin, wet hair clinging to their forehead, my own eyes staring back at me. I slammed the door open and ran into the night. The cold bit into me instantly, sharp as glass. My breath turned white and heavy. I sprinted toward the tree line, not daring to look back. The fog was thicker here, rolling low and silent, muffling sound until the only thing I could hear was my heartbeat. Then came the dragging again, closer, faster this time. I turned, flashlight beam shaking wildly. The mist parted, and for an instant I saw dozens of them, human shapes frozen mid-step, faces warped and gray, eyes black as meltwater. They weren't chasing me, they were watching. I stumbled backward, tripped, fell hard into the snow. When I looked up again, they were gone. Only the fog remained, pulsing faintly like it was alive and breathing around me. I staggered back to the van, gasping, every muscle screaming. The moment I slammed the door shut, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then went dark. I tried the ignition. Nothing, just silence. Then on the windshield, frost began to spread from the edges inward, crystallizing fast. The patterns formed letters again. Return to the ice. My chest tightened. I shouted, "What do you want from me?" My voice cracked in the cold, and then from somewhere deep in that impossible stillness, a whisper answered, "You." That's when I understood. The danger in Glacier Bay wasn't just its wilderness. It wasn't the weather or the isolation. It was something older than all of it, something that remembers every soul that ever tried to leave. And it had remembered me. I don't know how long I sat there in that freezing van watching the frost bloom over the glass. It spread like veins, pulsing faintly with light. My breath fogged the air, and for a moment I thought I could see movement inside the ice itself. Faint silhouettes like faces pressing outward from behind the windshield. They shifted and twisted until one of them aligned perfectly with mine. I blinked and it vanished. The van's battery finally clicked back to life. I turned the key and the engine coughed, shuddered, then roared. I didn't think. I just drove. My headlights cut through the fog like a lifeline. The road was narrow and winding, trees closing in on both sides. Somewhere behind me, I could swear I heard the crunch of footsteps matching my speed, pacing the van like something running along the tree line. I pushed the gas harder. By dawn, I reached a service station, a lonely outpost half buried in snow, fluorescent lights buzzing weakly through the mist. I parked crookedly, stumbled out, and leaned on the hood, gulping air that felt too thin. My hands shook so bad I dropped my thermos. It rolled beneath the pump, clinking softly. The attendant came out, a middle-aged man in a parka, narrow eyes squinting against the cold. "You all right, buddy? You look like hell." I tried to answer, but the words caught in my throat. He glanced past me toward the van, and his expression shifted, a flash of something between confusion and fear. "You been driving that thing long?" he asked. I frowned. 3 years. Why?" He stepped closer, pointing to the rear panel. "That frost on the windows, it's on the inside." I turned. He was right. Thin veins of ice traced the glass from within, curling into faint, deliberate shapes, almost like handwriting. I wiped at it from the outside. It didn't budge. The man sighed, shook his head. You must have come from the bay. I can smell it. Smell what? He hesitated. Cold, the kind that sticks. He didn't ask for payment. He just told me to keep moving south. Said if I stopped before I hit the ferry, I wouldn't start again. I wanted to laugh, but his tone made it impossible. As I pulled away, I caught a glimpse of him in the mirror. He was standing there, watching the van until the fog swallowed him. Hours passed. The further I drove, the more the world around me began to blur. The trees bent unnaturally in the mirrors, their trunks elongating in ways that made no sense. My reflection in the rear view didn't always match my movements. Sometimes I'd blink and catch my reflection still staring, just a split second behind. I tried the radio again, desperate for human voices. Even static would have been better than silence. But the channel that came through wasn't a broadcast. It was a recording. At first, it was faint, the sound of wind, water, and something heavy dragging through gravel. Then came a voice. My voice. I shouldn't have come back, it said. I slammed the radio off. The air inside the van was suffocating, the heater blowing cold now. I looked out the window, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw movement in the fog alongside me, a shape running parallel to the van, long limbs bending in impossible rhythm. That's when I realized the fog wasn't just outside. It was leaking through the vents. It coiled around the steering wheel, slipped across the dashboard, crawled along my arms. I could feel it, cold and damp, seeping through the seams of my jacket, through my skin. My breath froze in my throat. I slammed the brakes and stumbled out of the van, coughing, clawing at the air. The world outside was gray and endless. The road behind me was gone, completely swallowed by mist. And in front of me, maybe 20 feet away, the fog was glowing faintly blue, like the pond I'd seen before. I took one step forward, then another. My boots crunched on frost. The air around me vibrated softly like a hum beneath hearing. The glow pulsed brighter. And then, from within it, I saw her. The woman from the campground. The one who'd told me to clean my mirrors. She stood barefoot on the ice, her hair matted with frost, her parka hanging in tatters. Her face was calm, but her eyes were empty. You didn't clean them, she said softly. What? My voice cracked. She pointed past me toward the van. They use reflections to find their way back. I turned. The side mirrors were frosted over completely, white and opaque. Beneath the ice, something moved. I could see the faint outline of hands pressing against the glass from the inside. She stepped closer, voice trembling now. They came through when you looked back. The realization hit me like a punch. The night I'd seen my reflection move differently. That was it. That was the invitation. I ran back to the van, grabbed my hammer from the toolbox, and smashed both mirrors clean off. Glass scattered into the snow like shards of ice. The fog reacted instantly, retreating, thinning, almost as if recoiling in pain. For the first time in days, the air felt warm. I turned to thank the woman, but she was gone. Only the faint imprint of her bare feet remained in the frost. I climbed back inside, shaking, the silence now almost peaceful. I drove until I reached open water, the endless gray of the ocean stretching out before me. I parked by the ferry dock, watching the ice drift. That's where I decided to stop running. Not because I wasn't scared anymore, but because I finally understood what Glacier Bay had wanted all along. It doesn't hunt you to kill you. It hunts to remember you, to pull you back into its stillness, into the endless cold where nothing moves and nothing fades. It wants your story to freeze there in perfect silence. I watched the horizon for a long time, thinking about all the names carved into that cabin wall, the ones marked returned. I think I know what that meant now. They weren't people who came back. They were people the Bay had called home. And maybe that's what'll happen to me someday. Maybe when I stop driving, stop fighting the fog, it'll come for me again. But until then, I keep moving. Because the road south may never end, but it's the only thing that still feels alive. Sometimes, on cold mornings, I still see the frost creep along the window, It doesn't frighten me anymore. I trace it with my finger, watch it melt beneath my touch, and whisper back, I remember you too. The rain was still clinging to the windshield when I pulled into the gravel turnout that overlooked the Columbia River Gorge. You couldn't see the river, not through the mist that morning. Everything was muted. Silver sky, gray trees, the faint hum of my old RV engine as it idled like a tired heart. I shut it off and just sat there for a moment, listening to the metal tick as it cooled. I'd been driving since dawn through twisting mountain roads where fog rolled low and dense, swallowing every turn. The Pacific Northwest has that way of quieting you, making you feel like you're trespassing on something ancient, something that remembers before you were born. My name's Aaron, 46. I'd taken this trip alone, something I'd always promised myself I'd do once the kids were grown and my marriage had settled into that strange silence of people who used to talk about everything. I'd bought the RV, a used 2004 Winnebago, after finding it on a Craigslist ad posted by some retired couple in Portland. They'd taken it all the way to the Yukon and back. I remember the old man telling me, "She's sturdy, but she's got a soul. Don't park her somewhere she doesn't belong." I laughed at the time, thinking it was just sentimental talk. That first night, I parked at a small campground outside of Stevenson. It wasn't official, more like a pull-off spot with a couple of fire rings and a pit toilet that leaned like it was ready to give up. I liked that kind of place. No crowds, no noise except for the rain and the occasional freight train echoing from across the gorge. I lit a small fire, made some instant coffee, and watched the fog thicken around me. I remember thinking it felt almost alive, moving in slow, pulsing breaths, curling around the trees like fingers. Somewhere after midnight, I woke to a sound, a soft tapping like someone flicking their nail against the RV's metal siding. I lay still for a while, trying to tell myself it was just the wind shaking a branch loose. But it came again. Tap, tap. Not rhythmic, not random either. I sat up and turned off the little fan above the bed so I could listen better. It stopped the moment I moved. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound itself. I told myself it was just an animal. Raccoon, maybe a bird. But when I looked through the blinds, I didn't see movement. Just fog so dense it pressed against the glass, making it look like the world outside had been erased. That's when I noticed something strange. My breath fogged the window from the inside, but there was another shape, faint, just on the other side of the glass. A perfect oval of condensation, like someone had leaned close and exhaled from the outside. I froze. My brain scrambled for logic. Maybe heat escaping from the RV created it? Maybe I'd left the window open earlier? But deep down, I knew it was none of that. I turned on the lights, grabbed the flashlight, and stepped outside. The air was thick and wet, smelling of pine and earth. The beam of my light sliced through the mist, showing nothing but droplets hanging in the air. The ground was soft with moss, and I could see my own footprints from earlier, but nothing new. That's when I heard it. A cough. Human. Low. Strained, like someone trying not to be heard. It came from just beyond the tree line. I called out, "Hello," my voice breaking slightly, bouncing off the fog. Nothing. Not even an echo. I waited, heart pounding so loud it drowned the rain. After a long minute, I went back inside, locked the door, and left the outside light on. Sleep never came again that night. I sat at the dinette table with a knife in my hand, staring at that oval mark on the glass until dawn turned the fog to pale gold. The next morning, I thought about leaving, cutting the trip short, heading back east toward dry, familiar land. But that stubborn part of me refused to let fear take the wheel. I told myself it was just nerves, just a mind too used to noise now alone with its own echoes. So I kept driving north. By the third day, I'd made it past Mount St. Helens, through long stretches of evergreens and winding two-lane roads that seemed to coil deeper into isolation. I stopped at a place I'd read about on an RV forum, a hidden gem of a campground on the Olympic Peninsula, tucked beside an old logging road. The photos had shown a clearing beside a slow river. but when I arrived, it felt different. The grass was long and damp, as if no one had stayed there in years. There were picnic tables, but they were covered in green film, and the fire pits were half filled with cold rainwater. Still, the air was fresh, the forest alive with the sound of distant running water and wind through the ferns. I parked under a massive cedar, turned off the engine, and let the silence return. I felt small again, not in a bad way, just aware of how much older and more patient the world around me was. That night, I made stew on the propane stove and listened to the forest settle. Rain started again, tapping softly on the roof. I was almost asleep when I heard it, that same tapping sound, faint at first, then sharper. This time, it came from the rear panel of the RV. I sat up, breath held, waiting. It stopped. Then something brushed against the side, a slow, dragging sound like fingertips trailing along metal. I slid from the bed and grabbed the flashlight. The moment my boots hit the floor, the brushing stopped. I stood in the center of that little space, every nerve straining to hear something familiar, something rational. The forest outside was silent. No rain, no frogs, no wind, just stillness. I unlatched the door and stepped into the cold. The fog was thicker than before, curling low to the ground. My breath came out in clouds that hung too long in the air. I moved around the RV, shining the light along the panels, expecting to see scratch marks or branches, but there was nothing. No tracks, no movement. When I circled back to the front, I stopped dead. On the driver's side window, drawn through the misted glass, was a single word, "Stay." My throat went dry. The letters were crooked, scrawled from the outside, and each stroke had cleared away a small patch of condensation. I didn't even think. I ran inside, locked the door, and started the engine. The headlights cut through the fog just enough to show what looked like a figure at the edge of the clearing. Tall, still, half hidden among the trees. I floored it, tearing down that narrow dirt road until branches scraped against the sides like claws. It wasn't until I hit pavement again that I realized how fast my heart was beating. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 20 miles away. Inside, I grabbed a coffee and tried to make sense of what had happened. I told the clerk someone might be messing around up at the campground. Maybe squatters, maybe locals trying to scare off campers. He gave me a long look before shaking his head. That place? Nobody's supposed to go up there. There was a landslide near the river a few years back. Took out half the road. Forestry folks say it's unstable ground now. I asked if anyone lived nearby. He hesitated. There used to be an old man who stayed in a trailer out there, kind of a hermit. Vanished around the same time the slide happened. They found his camper later, but, well, not him. I didn't ask more. I drove to a proper RV park near the coast, a clean, well-lit place with hookups, showers, people, the kind of safety that comes from proximity. But even there, when I turned off the lights that night, I kept seeing that word in my mind. Stay. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe it was something else. But every time the wind pressed against the RV, I found myself listening again. For that tapping, for that drag of fingers across metal. I told myself I'd never go back to that region, but part of me knew I would. There's something about the Pacific Northwest, something that holds you in its damp, whispering grasp long after you've left. I left the coast the next morning with that uneasy silence still sitting somewhere deep in my chest. The campground owner waved as I pulled out, cheerful, oblivious, and for a moment I envied how normal the world looked in daylight. Kids were riding bikes between rows of RVs, dogs barking, smell of bacon drifting from open windows. It all looked too alive, too ordinary, as if the night before had just been a bad dream that didn't belong to this version of reality. But I knew better. I'd spent half the night convincing myself what happened in that clearing could be explained. Kids playing pranks, some kind of leftover marking from a previous camper. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those crooked letters through the condensation. They weren't drawn by a child. They had pressure, intent, the kind of motion that comes from a trembling hand. I told myself I'd head south, maybe back toward Mount Rainier, maybe home. Yet when I reached the intersection that led inland, something inside me turned the wheel north instead. I told myself I just wanted closure, to see the place again, to prove it wasn't what it felt like. But maybe part of me already knew I wasn't in control anymore. The Olympic forests have this way of pulling you in. They aren't loud like the Rockies or colorful like the Appalachians. They're dense, shadowed, heavy with moisture and silence, the kind of silence that eats sound whole. As I drove, the light grew dimmer, even though it was barely noon. Moss hung from the trees like uncombed hair, and the road narrowed to a thread of cracked asphalt swallowed by ferns. I stopped at a trailhead near an old bridge, the kind of place that didn't appear on GPS anymore. There was no one there, no other vehicles, just a small clearing beside the river that seemed like it had forgotten people existed. I cut the engine, stepped outside, and felt the stillness sink into me. For a moment, it was peaceful, the kind of quiet you don't realize you've been missing. The air smelled of wet cedar and iron, and the steady drip of rain through the canopy created a rhythm that was almost meditative. I thought, maybe this is what I needed all along, to face whatever had scared me and find reason again. But as I unpacked, I noticed something strange. On the side of the RV, near the lower panel where the paint had chipped, there were scratches. Not deep, but deliberate, a series of parallel lines etched into the metal, evenly spaced like someone had dragged their fingers with care. 5 marks. I crouched closer, ran my hand over them. The grooves weren't rusted or old, they were fresh. The air around me seemed to tighten. I stood, scanning the tree line, but the forest gave nothing back. The mist drifted slow, indifferent. I told myself maybe I'd done it scraping through brush on the drive. But deep down, I knew the truth. I'd washed that side just yesterday. Those marks hadn't been there. Still, I stayed. I set up camp, made a fire, and tried to lose myself in the sound of the river. As darkness came, the rain returned, not heavy, but persistent. I sat inside, reading by the dim yellow light of the cabin lamp. Around midnight, the rain stopped. The sudden absence of sound made me look up. It was like the world had paused mid-breath. Then came the tapping, slow, intentional, from the same place as before, the rear panel. Every muscle in my body went tight. I held my breath, listening. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. I reached for the flashlight and stood waiting for it again. Nothing. Then from the other side of the RV, a soft drag like something or someone was tracing their hand along the length of the wall. My mind started spinning. Wind, branches, maybe an animal. But the sound was too measured. It stopped at the door. I don't know what possessed me, but I moved toward it. The handle was right there, cold under my fingertips. I whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. Then, through the narrow window beside the door, a shape shifted, just enough to block the faint moonlight. I caught the outline of a head, not moving, just standing there. I stumbled back, heart hammering, every instinct screaming not to open that door. I waited, counting my breaths, until I couldn't stand it anymore. I flicked on the headlights. The beams cut through the window, lighting the clearing. Empty. The door window showed nothing now, just fog swirling in the light. I stepped outside anyway. The cold hit hard, biting through my clothes. The air was thick with the smell of soil and something faintly metallic like old blood or rust. The ground around the RV was undisturbed. No footprints, no movement, not even a bird's call. But when I turned to look back at the door, I saw it. Another word, drawn through the condensation, letters trembling as if written by a shaking hand. Follow. That was when I broke. I ran to the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away without even disconnecting the leveling chocks. I drove until the road widened, then kept driving. The fog followed me. I could see it in the mirrors, thickening behind the RV like smoke. At dawn, I found myself parked beside a closed ranger station. My hands were still shaking. When the rangers arrived later that morning, they found me sitting on the steps, exhausted, barely able to explain what happened. One of them, a middle-aged man named Jensen, listened quietly. When I told him about the place near the old bridge, he frowned. "There's no road access past that bridge anymore," he said. "The area's been off limits since the floods last winter. You sure you weren't on private land?" "I was on a public pull-off," I told him. "Old trailhead near a clearing by the river." He exchanged a look with the younger ranger beside him. Then he said, "That clearing's been gone for years, friend. Washed out completely. No one camps there anymore." I didn't argue. I just asked if they'd ever heard of people disappearing up there. Jensen hesitated, then said, "There've been a few incidents, mostly hikers who wandered off. They find the vehicles, sometimes even the tents, but not the people." He told me to stick to official campgrounds. I nodded, thanked him, and left. But I couldn't shake his words. They didn't sound like a warning. They sounded like regret. That evening, I found a small diner off Highway 101, the kind that smells like bacon grease and old coffee. I sat by the window, watching the rain return. When I asked the waitress if she'd ever heard of strange things happening in the forests up north, she looked at me for a long moment before saying quietly, "You're not the first to ask that." When I pressed her, she shook her head. "People hear things, see things. Sometimes they come back talking about voices in the fog, about someone knocking on their camper in the middle of the night. Sometimes they don't come back at all." I left a generous tip and walked out into the rain. That night, I parked at a rest stop near the coast again, not because I trusted it, but because I couldn't bring myself to keep driving. I told myself I'd sleep until morning, then find a motel and end this trip for good. But as I lay in the dark, the rain began to soften against the roof, slow, rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. And somewhere beyond the sound of my own breathing, I swore I heard it. A voice. Not outside, but from somewhere deep in the metal of the RV itself. A whisper carried through the vibration of the frame. Stay. The same word. The same voice. I sat up, and the air inside the RV felt heavier, like it was pressing inward from all sides. I reached for the ignition, but before I could turn the key, something shifted in the corner of the room. Just a shadow at first, the kind your mind tries to explain away. But it moved. Slowly. Deliberately. And when I turned on the light, it was gone. Just the hum of the engine, the rain against glass, and my reflection staring back at me. But for the first time, I wasn't sure it was only mine. By the next morning, I'd stopped pretending I was just tired or anxious. There was something with me. Not behind me, not outside. With me. I'd driven for hours through that endless gray coastline, trying to outrun a feeling that didn't have a body. Every sound inside the RV, the rattle of loose cookware, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of suspension over potholes, began to sound deliberate, patterned. It was as if the whole vehicle had learned how to breathe. I tried to tell myself I needed rest, that paranoia was just exhaustion stretching too thin. But then, while stopped at a red light near Forks, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw something that made every muscle in me lock up. In the fogged rear window, faint but unmistakable, were fingerprints. Not smears. Prints. 5 of them, pressed into the condensation from the inside. My heart dropped straight through the floor. I turned around, scanning the back of the RV, every inch of the interior glowing in the weak daylight. No one there. The couch cushions untouched, the cabinets closed, but those prints stayed visible in the mirror, clear and wet, like someone had just placed their hand there seconds ago. I didn't even wait for the light to change. I floored it, tires screeching through the intersection, the RV groaning like it hated what I was doing to it. I didn't have a destination anymore. I just drove. Through rain and mist, past moss-covered bridges and gas stations that looked abandoned even when the lights were on. I stopped only once, somewhere near Lake Quinault, just long enough to fill up and grab coffee. The old man behind the counter looked at me like I'd come from a different century. When I asked if there was anywhere nearby to camp safely for the night, he didn't even hesitate. He said, "Don't. Keep driving till you're east of the mountains." There was something in the way he said it, not fear exactly, but fatigue. Like he'd said it before, and it hadn't helped. That night, I parked near the edge of a clear-cut stretch of forest. Stumps like gravestones, the smell of wet sawdust thick in the air. I thought maybe being out in the open would make me feel safer, give me a sense of visibility. It didn't. The darkness here wasn't like the forest. It wasn't deep or ancient. It was empty, stripped bare like something had consumed it. I left every light on inside the RV. Sat there at the table, hands wrapped around a mug I wasn't drinking from, and that's when I started hearing the voice again. Faint, just under the static hum of the cabin. At first, I thought it was the radio, but the radio wasn't on. It was coming from the ventilation system. A low whisper, like words being carried on a long exhale. I leaned closer, heart pounding. The voice was slow, deliberate, same tone, same trembling edge as before. Why did you leave? The words came soft, fragile, almost mournful. Not angry. I stepped back, shaking my head, whispering to myself that this wasn't happening. But the voice came again, louder this time. Not outside, not even in the vents anymore. It was inside the air itself. You saw me. The room felt smaller, like the walls were bending inward. My reflection in the window glass rippled faintly, like I was watching myself through shallow water. That's when I saw movement again. The faint shimmer of something behind me, caught in the reflection. Not a figure, not exactly. More like heat distortion, a wavering outline that flickered in and out of shape. I turned, but there was nothing. The air where it had been was cold enough to sting. I stumbled toward the bed, suddenly desperate to get out, to get anywhere else. I slammed the ignition and drove. The road twisted up into the mountains, fog rolling between the trees like smoke. The headlights caught glimpses of things that could have been trunks or could have been people. It was hard to tell at that speed. After what felt like hours, I found a pull-off by a river. Black water rushing fast enough to drown the sound of the engine. I parked there, turned everything off, and sat in the dark, trying to remember when this had stopped being a trip and started being something else. The whisper came again. But this time it wasn't through metal or air. It was inside my head. You shouldn't have run. I grabbed the steering wheel, gripping it until my knuckles went white. What do you want? I shouted into the emptiness. No answer, just the roar of the river. Then, slowly, from somewhere in the dark outside, a single sound, the same slow tap, tap, tap against the side of the RV. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The sound circled, right to left, like someone dragging a finger along the metal. When it reached the door, it stopped. Then came the faint click of the handle trying to turn. I slammed the locks down, heart racing, my breath coming in short bursts. I backed away until I hit the wall. And then, from the corner of the cabin, where the lamplight didn't quite reach, I saw something crawl slowly into the light. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even a shape I could name. It looked like fog condensed into something that almost had form. Shoulders, a head that flickered in and out, arms too long, dragging along the floor. And within that shifting mass, faintly, I saw a face. Not unfamiliar. Mine, distorted, like seen through warped glass. Lips moving, eyes hollow but aware. It was looking at me, and when it opened its mouth, I felt the words before I heard them. You stayed. The next thing I remember is waking up at sunrise, the RV still idling, the door locked, my hands stiff from gripping the steering wheel all night. The fog was gone. The forest was still. And for the first time in days, there was no tapping, no voice, no sound at all except the steady rumble of the engine. I drove until the tank was nearly empty. Found myself back near Stevenson, the same place I'd started, same gravel turnout, same mist crawling over the river. When I stepped outside, everything smelled new again. Pine, rain, soil, as if the forest had exhaled. I looked at the side of the RV where the scratches had been. They were still there, but fainter now, like old scars. I don't know what followed me out there. I don't know if it wanted to hurt me or warn me or just be remembered. But I know this. It wasn't the forest that was haunted. It was me. Maybe we all carry something that waits for the quiet, for the fog, for the moment we're alone long enough to finally hear it. Before I left, I stood at the edge of that clearing and whispered into the mist. Not in fear this time, but in gratitude. For the lesson I didn't want but somehow needed, that running from what terrifies you only binds it closer. Then I climbed back into the RV, turned the key, and drove east, out of the fog into sunlight. For the first time, I didn't look back, but even now, when the rain starts tapping at night, I listen, not in dread, but in memory, because somewhere out there, in the damp breath of those woods, something remembers me too. I should have turned back the moment my GPS went silent. It wasn't the kind of silence where a signal drops or the map freezes. The entire screen went white, then black, like the device decided it no longer recognized the world around me. I tapped the screen, shook the phone, restarted it. Nothing. All I could see through the windshield was a narrow strip of cracked asphalt winding deeper into the Appalachian foothills, like a snake trying to hide from daylight. But I was stubborn, maybe reckless. Traveling solo in my old Volkswagen camper made me feel free, like the country really did still have open places left, places where eyes didn't follow you everywhere, places untouched by neon lights and highway noise and the thousands of invisible hands pulling at you from screens every day. And this back road felt untouched, too untouched. The sound of gravel pinging under the tires set a nervous rhythm in my chest. My windows were cracked open a bit because the van's AC died somewhere in Kentucky and the air outside smelled wet, like moss and iron. Occasionally, a gust pushed in something sweeter, like honeysuckle, but rotting from the inside out. The map said I'd find a campground called Red Hollow Rest 20 minutes off the main route, but I hadn't seen a sign, a house, or even a plastic bag snagged in a tree in nearly 40. Just endless, smothering forest twisting over the road like it wanted to keep the sky for itself. When the first flicker of movement appeared in my side mirror, I thought it was just a trick of the trees, shadows crossing shadows. But when it appeared again, closer, I gripped the wheel. The shape didn't look like a car, more like a person, walking in the road. Except I wasn't slowing down, and they didn't get out of the way. Sweat trickled between my shoulder blades as I leaned forward, squinting. But when I looked directly behind me, nothing was there. My mirror reflected only trees, vines clinging to bark like knuckles, and a strip of road disappearing into darkness. A shiver crawled up my arms. "You're tired," I muttered to myself. "You're seeing things because you're tired." But the truth was, I hadn't slept well in a long time. Not since I left home. Not since the nightmares, black water flooding the van, a voice whispering my name from under the bed, chased me into waking each morning. Maybe that's why I kept driving. Maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't running away from anything real. The road narrowed again, this time so sharply that branches scraped loud fingers down the sides of the van. My headlights caught a sign ahead, the first sign I'd seen in miles. Red Hollow Rest 1 mile. Except the arrow was pointing backward, the opposite direction I was headed. I slowed, staring at it. The paint looked new. The wood looked old. And at the bottom corner, a little symbol was carved into the sign's post, a circle with 3 vertical lines inside it. I didn't know why it hit me so hard, but my stomach clenched like I recognized it, like I'd seen it somewhere before. Maybe in a dream, maybe online, maybe on that blog I used to read, The Road Knows, about weird travel encounters before it got taken down. All the posts are still cached if you dig far enough, but the images changed, pixelated into shapes that look like that symbol. Just thinking about it made me cold. I turned the wheel forward again, refusing to look behind me in case the shape returned. The road spilled out unexpectedly into a clearing, the kind that felt carved, not grown. My headlights washed over what might have once been a campground, an information board with no map, a few tilted picnic tables, a rusted water pump that probably hadn't run since the Carter administration. I pulled into an empty spot near the tree line. The forest here seemed deeper, like the darkness had layers to it. My headlights struggled to push it back. With a shaky breath, I killed the engine. Instant silence. No insects. No owls. No wind. The absence of sound was like pressure, squeezing my throat shut. Even my breathing sounded wrong. Too loud. Unwelcome. I stepped out of the van. The soil beneath my boots felt soft, too soft, like something had been digging tunnels just beneath the surface. The air tasted metallic. Each breath stuck to the inside of my mouth with a copper film. Okay. Quick setup. Eat, sleep, leave at dawn. I flicked on my lantern and headed toward the picnic table to prep a simple meal. Canned chili, crackers, something normal. But the longer I stood in the light, the more I could feel the dark watching me. Not lurching shapes, not glowing eyes, just the knowledge that the trees encircled me, that they did not move in the wind, but still somehow shifted when I wasn't looking. Halfway through dinner, a faint crackle drifted through the air. Static. Like an old radio trying to find the right station. It seemed to fade in from the van, so I set the lantern down and walked back toward the sliding door. When I opened it, I froze. My CB radio, something I hadn't used in months, had turned itself on. The dial pulsed softly, like it was breathing. The static wasn't random noise, it had a rhythm, almost like a whisper too distorted to form syllables. I reached slowly toward it. The static cut out, then one sharp click came through the speaker. Then a second. Then, in perfect mimic of a human knocking rhythm, click, click, click. I yanked the radio's power cord out. The sound continued for 2 more knocks. Then silence swallowed everything again. My pulse thundered in my ears. I needed sleep. I needed to stop imagining patterns in noise. I climbed into the van, locked the doors twice, pulled the curtains closed, and lay down on the narrow bed. The smell of the forest had followed me inside. Wet leaves, old earth, and that sweet, rotting scent clinging to my clothes. I stared at the ceiling, trying to breathe slow, trying not to listen. But the silence dug under my skin. My mind amplified every creak of the van frame, every shift of fabric. And then I heard it, a voice. So soft I almost mistook it for breath. It came from beneath the floor of the van. A single word, drawn out like the speaker was struggling to form it. Down. I bolted upright, heart pile-driving my ribs. My mouth opened to shout, but the voice spoke again, muffled, scraping, as though forcing itself through layers of earth. Down here. The van rocked, just slightly, but enough that I felt the weight shift. The springs thudded under the mattress. Someone was underneath me. I held my breath, waiting for the next movement. None came. I didn't sleep. I just sat there frozen, staring into the dark until a faint gray crease of morning bled through the curtains. I didn't check under the van. I didn't want to know. I only knew I needed to get out. Now. But when I stepped outside, something crunched beneath my boot. A piece of paper, soaked and covered in dirt. I lifted it carefully. It was a map of Red Hollow Rest, drawn in looping black marker. Lines spiraling inward, tighter and tighter toward the center where someone had written in shaky letters, "It's not the road that moves, it's you." The smell of rot hit me again, stronger this time, like breath against my neck. I lowered the map slowly, and there, dug into the soft soil beneath the van, was the same circle with 3 vertical lines, not carved, scratched, from below. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My pulse was ticking in my ears so loud it felt like it was syncing with the whole forest. I crouched down, staring at the symbol etched into the dirt, not etched, clawed, the grooves uneven, frantic. Damp earth still clung to the edges like whatever made it hadn't finished burrowing away. My throat tightened. I needed to leave. No breakfast, no stretching, no pretending this place was meant for humans. The van door squealed too loudly when I yanked it open. Part of me expected someone to grab me from beneath as I climbed in, a hand, slippery and cold, wrapping around my ankle and pulling me under. But nothing happened. Not yet. I turned the key. The van coughed, choked. A low grinding sound gnawed at the engine. "Not now," I whispered. "Please." One more twist of the key, and the engine finally caught with a shudder, like it was waking from a nightmare of its own. I didn't let it settle. I slammed the gear into drive and rolled out of the campsite, tires spitting mud. The sun barely filtered through the trees, weak and colorless. As I pulled back toward the entrance, I saw the sign again. Red Hollow Rest, but the arrow was gone. In its place was a single carved word. Stay. My breaths came hot and shallow. I sped up. The back road looked different in morning light, or maybe it was different. Trees I didn't remember seeing last night hunched close to the road, branches bent low like they were listening. The asphalt seemed newer, smoother, too smooth for a road that had been cracking yesterday. That sour honeysuckle smell drifted into the van again, stronger, clinging, like decay dressed up as perfume. That's when my radio crackled, the same static rhythm as before, whispering in and out like someone speaking through cloth. I forced myself not to look at it, and then movement up ahead. A figure in the road. I slammed the brakes, tires sliding. The shape stood still just beyond the hood. A man. His clothes were old, denim overalls, faded flannel, the kind of worn fabric that looked stretched over too many years. His skin sagged at the jaw, pale as candle wax. His eyes, I couldn't see his eyes at all. Just dark hollows, reflecting nothing. He raised a hand slowly, palm facing me like he was waiting for something, or warning me. Every part of me screamed not to roll down the window, but he leaned closer, his mouth opening just a little. "You should have turned back," he said. The voice scraped like stone. I felt it more than heard it. My hand hovered over the gear shift. Frozen. He looked past me, over my shoulder, eyes widening, pupils finally showing, dilating into fear. "You brought it with you." My stomach dropped. I didn't want to know what he meant. I didn't want to look in the mirrors, afraid something would be staring back. He stepped away then, limping backward into the trees, not turning around, just retreating into the dark green like gravity pulled him in. I floored it. The van shook down the road, engine whining. I didn't stop to check signs anymore. I just needed a highway, a gas station, anything that wasn't this suffocating forest. After what felt like hours, my phone flickered back to life. A faint GPS signal blinked. Just a dot on a white background, then reconnected fully. A map sprang up. I exhaled, almost crying, but the map showed something that made cold pour down my spine. According to the screen, I was exactly where I had parked last night, still in the clearing of Red Hollow Rest, still surrounded by the trees, still trapped inside that carved circle of dirt. No. I blinked hard and looked through the windshield. The road ahead was there, stretching forward like freedom itself. But the map insisted. I hadn't moved an inch. A tear slipped hot from my eye. Was the road looping, or was I? The static from the radio burst again, louder, more aggressive. A voice pushed through, warped into painful clarity. "Down here." The van jolted violently upward, like something underneath had shoved it. The floor buckled beneath my feet. The whole chassis groaned. The tires sank half an inch into the wet soil with a wet suction sound. Something was climbing up. My brain shut down to anything but escape. I spun the wheel. The road blurred into trees. Branches whipped against the van, cracks streaking across the windshield. The undercarriage scraped something. A root, a rock, maybe a hand. The forest roared around me, though it had been silent all night. A second shove from below sent the van bouncing into a ditch. I clenched the wheel so hard my knuckles burned white. The tires spun, clawing at mud. Move, move, move! For a moment I thought I'd be swallowed whole, that the van would just slide down and the earth would close above me like a mouth. But the tire caught. The engine screamed. I lurched forward, bursting onto a straighter, wider patch of road. I didn't look back this time. Not until I saw asphalt turning visibly lighter ahead, sunlight hitting blacktop. Civilization. A highway ramp I recognized from yesterday, green signs pointing west and east, choices that finally made sense again. A laugh ripped from me, sobbing and breathless. My hands shook against the wheel. I didn't care where I went. I just merged, tires humming the beautiful, normal hum of real pavement. But after a few minutes, the CB radio clicked one last time. A single knock, then a second, then a third. My stomach twisted, hard. I forced myself to face the mirror. No figure behind me, no van rocking movement, no. But something was there, a smudge, on the inside of the rear window, dark streaks of dirt, 3 vertical lines inside a circle, the exact same symbol, not scratched from the outside, pressed from within. My van was no longer alone. I stared at that symbol on the rear window until the road blurred into gray motion. My knuckles locked around the steering wheel. I couldn't breathe. My lungs had turned into tight, shrinking fists inside my ribs. 3 vertical lines. A circle. Pressed outward, like something inside the van had leaned close while I wasn't watching. I didn't want to pull over. I didn't want to stop anywhere, but the van rattled with every mile, like the undercarriage was fractured or still burdened by whatever had pushed from beneath. Other cars finally joined the highway, proof that the world still existed outside this nightmare. A station wagon with a family, a truck hauling lumber, a silver sedan so ordinary it almost broke me with relief. I could outrun fear, I told myself. Wheels on pavement, daylight, people, reality would win if I just kept driving. I spotted a small gas station off the next exit, a squat place welded from the 1970s, sun-faded signs, and a flickering open light. Good enough. I needed fuel. Coffee. Maybe someone to tell me I was just tired. The bell over the door chimed as I stepped in. The air smelled faintly like old oil and microwaved burritos. A radio on the counter was playing Appalachian bluegrass, fast fingers on strings, upbeat and cheerful, the exact opposite of what my brain was playing. The guy behind the counter was late 60s, maybe, full beard gone silver, eyes so sharply blue they cut through the haze in my head. "You came from up that way?" he asked without looking away from me. I froze. "What?" He gestured loosely with a nod. "Route down from the National Forest." His tone was too sure, like he knew exactly which road. "Yeah," I said cautiously. "GPS glitched, ended up somewhere called Red Hollow Rest." That made him stop. His entire body seemed to stiffen, even the fabric of his shirt going still. The music from the radio filled the silence in fast, frantic beats. "There's no campground up there," he said flatly. "I saw it," I insisted. "Signs, picnic tables, even a..." He cut me off with a shake of his head. "No one's camped in those woods in decades." A pause. "Not by choice." I didn't know whether to laugh or run. "I'm telling you, I was there." He finally met my eyes, and what I saw in his wasn't disbelief, it was recognition. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Did you see anyone?" The man in the road flashed in my mind. His hollow eyes, his warning. Yes. His jaw trembled. "Then you need to leave. Now. Don't look back at that mountain again." My pulse pounded hard enough to blur the edges of my vision. "Why?" "What's happening up there?" His fingers tapped the counter, slow, rhythmic. 3 beats. Then again, my skin prickled. "You ever read about those disappearances?" he asked quietly. "The ones they don't put on tourist maps? RVers, campers, people who go driving into forgotten places like they're owed a piece of them." My throat dried out. "I've heard stories. They always say the same thing before they go." He swallowed. "The road didn't change." "But I did," I whispered before I could stop myself, repeating the words scrawled on the map. His eyes widened. "You still got anything from up there? Anything you didn't bring in?" My heart dropped into a cold pit. The map, the mud, the symbol on the window. "I'll check," I lied. He leaned in closer, voice barely breath. "If you hear someone knocking tonight 3 times, don't answer. And if you start dreaming of the ground opening underneath you..." His voice cracked. "Wake up fast." The bluegrass track abruptly cut out. Static rushed through the speakers, that same static, the same cadence. A whisper of a voice struggling to surface. The gas station lights flickered. I backed away, my whole body rigid. "I need to go." He nodded once, a grim blessing. "Drive west, stay on the main road, and if your map changes again..." "I know," I interrupted. He said firmly. "You don't." I rushed back to the van, glancing once over my shoulder. He stood framed in the doorway, watching me like he expected someone or something else to follow. The van door felt heavier than before, like it resisted letting me in. When I finally got it to shut, I didn't start the engine right away. I checked the floor, the corners, the bed frame, all angles of the rear window. No hands, no dirt mounds, just the smudged symbol. But then I saw something I hadn't noticed. Inside each of the 3 vertical lines, faint scratches, like tally marks, like someone counting days, or attempts, or victims. I cranked the engine and pulled away so hard the tires squealed. The road west stretched ahead like a lifeline. My mirrors showed the gas station shrinking, swallowed by distance and heat haze. 10 miles passed, then 20. Traffic thickened, the forest thinned, sunlight filled the sky like someone had turned the world back on. My breath started smoothing out, still fast, but not choking me anymore. I dared a few sips of gas station coffee, even though my hands still shook. And then the air inside the van turned cold. Not a breeze, not AC. A sharp drop like stepping into a cave. My breath fogged faintly against the windshield. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A notification. New message. Unknown. I stared at it, heart hammering against the bones of my chest. One finger reached out, hesitating, like touching it would stitch me to the nightmare permanently. I tapped the screen. The message was a single image, a photo taken from inside my van, of me, driving, taken from the back seat. I whipped around, terrified something would be there, a face, a hand, a hole in the air where someone had been sitting. Nothing moved, nothing shifted, but the shadows in the back seemed deeper than they should be. I turned forward again, trying not to cry. Then the radio clicked on by itself, only static, until the knocks returned. 3 knocks. I screamed, slamming my hand over the radio, but the sound vibrated through the whole dash. It wasn't coming from the speaker this time. It was coming from the floor. The knocks traveled up the wall paneling, crawling toward the back of the van, then silence. Pure, predatory silence. A new scent filled the van, thick and sweet, rotting honeysuckle, coiling through the air like something exhaling under my seat. I could feel it then. Not just a presence, a direction. Down. Something wanted me to come down. Into the dirt, into the dark. But I was awake. I was moving. It couldn't drag me yet. I choked out a breath. You're not real. You're not real. You're not. The van lurched. The engines sputtered like it had swallowed a lungful of mud. My phone screen warped, the map glitching into spirals. The trees outside began to thicken again. No, no, no. I checked the next exit sign flying past my window. Red Hollow. 3 miles. I nearly threw up. I had driven west. I had done everything right. The symbol on the window dripped, streaks of dirt sliding downward like fingers losing their grip. The road didn't move. It was me. I didn't want to believe it, but the proof was right there on the highway sign. Somehow, without turning around, without even slowing down, I was heading straight back to the place that wanted me buried beneath it. I stomped the gas, pushing the van harder than it was meant to go. The old engine rattled, wheezed. I clutched the wheel as if gripping it tighter would keep the world from folding in around me. But the forest thickened anyway. The light dimmed. Every breath I took tasted like damp soil and rust. The road curved gently, so gently it felt almost kind. But when the next sign passed, my blood ran cold. Red Hollow, 2 miles. I forced myself not to blink, not to look away from the road. It didn't matter. The van's headlights flickered. The radio let out a sharp pop as if something pressed too hard on the inside of the speaker. Then the voice seeped through again, this time clearer. Down here! I yelled back without thinking. Leave me alone! The voice answered immediately. You came alone. I slammed my fist against the radio, but the sound only moved, creeping into the roof panels, into the floor, into the seams of the vehicle, like it had memorized the layout of my home on wheels. My phone buzzed again in the cup holder. I didn't want to look. I couldn't not look. One new message. A different number. The text said, "Stop running. Just park." That was when I noticed the trees had vanished into darkness beyond the shoulder of the road. There was no underbrush, no terrain, just a black wall of nothingness on either side, like the road was the only thing left in the universe, and the rest had already been swallowed. I didn't register the tears until they were choking me. My foot stayed on the gas, but the speedometer began to fall, 60, 50, 40, like the van was dragging its tires through quicksand. Another sign. Red Hollow, 1 mile long. My breathing spiraled into panic. The van's frame groaned, metal straining. Something pressed upward against the floor beneath the brake pedal, warping it, bending it. Hands. I could feel fingers through the soles of my boots. They weren't cold. They were warm, human, terrifying. I stomped the accelerator again, but the pedal barely moved. My forward motion slowed to a crawl. Outside the windows, the asphalt rippled, like something under it was shifting, reorganizing, lifting into the shape of a path only I was allowed to follow. My phone buzzed. Voicemail this time. I didn't listen to it. Couldn't. Another sign. Red Hollow Rest, 0 miles. My heart stopped. The sign pointed directly toward the exit ramp ahead. I didn't take the turn. The van did. The wheel spun itself. My hands slipped uselessly along the leather as the road dragged me back into the trees. The asphalt narrowed again, cracked again, aged decades in seconds like time here ran faster. The sunlight disappeared behind the canopy as though it had never shown up at all. The clearing opened in front of me. My campsite. Exactly as I left it. Except for one thing. Someone else was parked there. Not a car. A camper trailer older than mine, dented sides, peeling paint. Its door stood open, a single dingy curtain fluttering, though there was no breeze. My van rolled to a full stop. The engine died instantly, like it was relieved to be done fighting. The static returned, a long, steady exhale through invisible teeth. Then the knocks. 1, 2, 3. This time on the sliding door, sharp and unmistakable. For a moment, I didn't breathe at all. My heart barely moved. My hand crawled toward the latch like it no longer belonged to me. Before I touched it, a voice spoke from just outside, so close I could hear the shape of the mouth that made it. "You brought it with you," the man from the road. Then his voice, twisted. "You always do." I shrank back, knees hitting the mini-fridge. My chest ached with terror so raw it felt like being skinned alive. Shadows flickered in the corners of the van, not shapes, impressions, as if something was testing the walls, curious what pressure it would take to break in. The knocks repeated 3 beats, but this time lower, beneath the van. Something was crawling under there again, scraping, clawing, rising. I threw the door open before I had time to think and stumbled out into the clearing, boots sinking into spongy soil. The air was thick, wrong, too warm, too sweet. The trees leaned closer, and I could swear their bark shifted like muscle tightening under skin. The trailer door creaked wider. A figure stepped into the daylight, or what little filtered through, a woman, maybe in her 30s. Mud dried on her arms up to the elbows, shirt torn, hair matted, eyes hollow and sunken like she hadn't seen a mirror or sleep in a long time. She looked at me with a recognition that turned my stomach. "You woke it," she whispered. "No," I whispered back, voice cracking. "I'm trying to escape." "You can't." Her head tilted with a horrible softness. "There's nowhere left to go, only down." I stumbled backward. "What is it? What does it want?" She lifted her arm, 3 lines carved into her skin, a circle around them. The wounds were fresh, weeping. "It wants home," she murmured. "It wants to come up, through you." The ground trembled beneath my feet, low at first, then stronger, soil cracked, earth separating, something pushing upward from below like a coffin lid swelling open. The woman stepped closer, voice calm as prayer. "The road is only the surface. Beneath it, the miles don't matter, only the pull." I turned to run, but the trees were too close now, branches knitting together, forming a wall of black bark and choking leaves. My knees buckled. The smell of rot filled my throat. The woman's breath quivered. "It's hungry." The earth split. A hole gaped open at my feet, so dark it had depth but no bottom. From within, a fetid gust blew upward, pulling my scream down before it ever reached air. Something touched my ankle. Fingers. Not dead. Not alive. Pulling. The van's sliding door flung wide as if caught in a hurricane gust, and inside the symbol on the rear window glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. A voice rose from below, layered. Too many mouths speaking at once. Down here, I clawed at the dirt, fingernails tearing. The woman watched, face blank as stone, no rescue, no hope, just witness. My body tipped forward, the hole widened, the forest leaned in. And the voice, my voice, echoed upward from the darkness beneath me. "You brought me with you." My fingers slipped. The ground swallowed my scream.